Hello and welcome back to Eve Space Project. So, as you can see here, we're starting off today with a mission to get some more science. And the science is coming from Gilly. Now, I've picked this because it is the easiest mission that I could possibly get, and I want to waste some money here upgrading the Space Center so that I can have more Kerbals. So all we do is we pick this mission up. After I upgrade the Space Center, we jump straight towards the probe that we launched for Gilly last time. And then we just deorbit it to the surface. Now Gilly has such a low orbital velocity and such low gravity that I could just drop straight onto the surface. The only problem being communication. As you can see there, I'm sort of dropping in and out of communication, so there's a bit of risk of losing communication when you're doing this. But I was keeping an eye on which side of the planet the space station was on, because that boosts my communication. So we get down to the surface and just grab a little bit of science and then dart back off into a higher orbit. Now, at this point in time, I'm still having problems with processing science on the space station. I don't quite know what's going on, but any science helps, and obviously completing missions gets us more money. So, next on the agenda we have another Estonian rocket launching up towards the space station, and what I'm doing, I'm sort of showing how I'm doing these at the moment. They seem to be alright, and somebody could probably tell me in the comments if I have a better way of doing this, but I find going almost vertical up until about 10,000 meters and then booting it sideways, obviously in this Eve version, because of the mod for the bases, the atmosphere is actually at 55 kilometers. That's the limit of the atmosphere, but it is still dense further down, and I'm still having problem launching large vehicles. Well, I'm having problem launching any vehicles, so I think I'm wasting a fair chunk of Delta V. But once we get up there, as you can see here, I'm messing about with science. I still don't know what's going on, and I can't quite process science, so it is annoying me, and it took me a while to figure this out. But in the meantime, what I'm doing is I'm taking missions for space tourism, but I'm also taking any other missions, and I happen to pick up one for grabbing somebody from orbit, rescuing a Kerbal from orbit. As it happens, it's a Kerbal that's in one of the DSEV parts, and it's a genuine rescue because I can't get him to escape, so I have to take a Kerbal over and open the boarding ramp and then allow him to get out that way. But once he's out, we're all good, and we've just got the standard deceleration, coming back into the atmosphere and then tipping the axis of the re-entering craft up just to lower the G-forces. As you can see there, I'm keeping an eye on it, but I slowed down this time quite heavily on my way back in. I was carrying a bit more fuel than normal because of the fact that usually I dump the excess fuel at the station, but this time, because I had an orbital rendezvous to do it, I kept a bit of surplus just in case. So, up next we have a bit more of a heavy launcher. Now, I'm doing the same trick with the space tourists, sort of paying off the mission. That's why I'm using the big Estonian launchers, because I can carry as many of them as possible. However, as you can see, this one's got 6 boosters as opposed to the usual 4, and the reason is that I'm actually launching some equipment. If you notice, there's some extra pods around about the Estonian, and also the base section of it is being converted to equipment carrying. The reason for this is I discovered the problem was that I had the wrong template on one of the on the expandable science lab. It was set as a basic science template that the Wild Blue Industries uses, but not the commercial science lab, which is what I needed to have it to process all the science I was sending back. So now I've made this discovery, I get there, I do a little bit of rejiggering, waste some equipment. You can see there as the camera shifts, and we have a converted science lab, so I immediately jump out, grab some science, and now it's on to beasting as much science as possible to be able to get more and get more things unlocked. I am running an interesting science program because I've unlocked a lot of things that I can use for the science, but not a lot of the rocket things. So at the moment it's becoming difficult. I'm at the limit of my ability to launch out of the atmosphere, and I need some bigger rockets, so I need some money and I need some science, hence all of these missions. But we jump across to Gilly. Is it Gilly or Moho? I always forget. Well, the asteroid slash moon of Eve. We jump across there and redo our science stuff and send it back. And doing this gets us some extra science that we can process. Obviously there's an exponential thing to do with processing science in the commercial science lab that means that the more you have, the faster you process it, so you want to keep that topped up with science at all times. Now, from what I understand, because of the way that it processes the difficulty levels, I get less than what's advertised when it clicks add to science lab, so after all is said and done, I think I get about a quarter of what it says, but it could be less than that, it could be more, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, science is the name of the game. So, keeping with the theme of more science and more money, I take a couple of missions, and the first one is launch a probe into a specific orbit. Now, this should be easy enough, so I design a new rocket and I design a probe, and it completely balls up the takeoff, as you can see there. I'm now using asparagus staging on this because it seems a bit more efficient. It's supposedly it's the best staging that you can get. It is more efficient, but obviously with the way that I fly, it's not great. But I still managed to get up into orbit, and I launched this thing, and as you can see I tumble out of control, and it keeps happening whenever I use this particular rocket. As soon as it cuts off fuel, it whips to the side and spins me, but with a little bit of timing you can get it back under control, and then I just have to burn to the orbit that's requested. So I just have to tilt my inclination. Now, I could have launched into that inclination, but between that and the difficulty of launching out of Eve, I was just lazy and couldn't be bothered, so, well, what are you going to do? But I set my intercept nodes, get us out there, and I have no real intention in staying in this node, but as you can see from this probe, there is a scanner on it, so that's my final objective. Complete the mission and then shift the probe so that it's in a polar orbit and I can scan Eve, which should give me the ability to see what resources are on Eve, and I might actually be able to do a bit of mining on the surface and make myself a little bit of money to match. So that's the final objective, and as you can see here, during the burn I run out of fuel, but we continue going until I get polar orbit, and as it happens you have to get a direct on polar orbit, which is sort of understandable but also a bit of a pain. But once we're up there, there's a scan complete, and because we're in a decent orbit I run some more science as well, and by the end of it we have enough science and everything else that we need. So we do our usual jump back through the station, retrieve all the science, add what we can to the lab and transmit the rest back to Gerwin. There's no point in keeping it. And then on to the next boring thing to do. Now I say boring because, oh god, this took ages, and I'm only showing you a clip of it because it's this little tiny airship that I've made, and I'm running about grabbing all of the science that I can with the atmospheric scoop now that I've unlocked it. And yeah, it was just dull and awful and so much repetition, it's unreal. So we'll just jump off of that and jump to something a little bit more exciting. One of the other missions that I have is to explore Gilly. Now I need to get a craft up there, but first I figure I want to put a base on there. Two birds with one stone, so I decide to launch one of these again. Because of the delta V that this particular probe has, it should be able to get into Gilly orbit no problem. So I launch it, going straight up the usual way, and to cut a long story short, we head up and we head for Gilly into a polar orbit to scan all of the resources, get as much science as we can from a high orbit, transmit it all back so we've got the science, we've got the map, and then launch a mission. So as you can see, I've got the same problems again, but we get to Gilly, we get into our polar orbit eventually, and we get everything set up for our next missions, which is always nice. And as usual, transmitting all the science back. But just before I jump ahead, because I've got a few, I need to get some more science points to unlock some things. I specifically want nuclear rockets to shove a bigger ship out to Gilly, because it is a bit of pain on the orbital, the delta V required for the orbit to push it out there. I decide to expand the station. So what I do is I launch this craft that I've used before, and I've pretty much just tweaked a few things inside this. And I do the same launch that I did the last time, which is essentially pushing this up so that it's in a ballistic re-entry trajectory. That's not easy to say with the cold I've got. and then docking these two together, and as you can see I'm actually descending towards the atmosphere while I'm doing this, so it is a bit of a tight manoeuvre. And as you can see, I use time warp a tiny bit to stabilise it and cheat. It does have RCS, so it's not a big cheat, it's just a pain jumping between all the different movable parts. But we get docked and then fire the thrusters and go for it. Now, one thing that did happen was I wasn't entirely paying attention to my altitude, which when you're on a ballistic re-entry sort of makes sense that you should. And I didn't notice I was dropping into the atmosphere. So we did lose a solar panel over this section because I re-entered the atmosphere of Eve, which is always a bright idea. But we did get it up and get it stabilised, and then get it launched, get it docked towards this section. So a little bit of docking dancing, but after we've pulled a couple of weird manoeuvres and stabilised for the weird glitch that I seem to get, I keep getting docking ports throwing me massively. We get everything docked together and we reorganise the parts and use one of them as, because these are drone modules, I use one of them as storage because they've got rearrangeable storage inside them. But then, as I said, I wanted to put a little bit of a mining base down on the planet, and because I unlock some of the nuclear things, I create a little probe, atmospheric probe, that has a nuclear reactor on it. So we set it up and we get it going, and it's just propeller driven because it's Eve and propellers work fine, provided you don't want to leave the atmosphere. And we send it off, find a good spot where I've got lots of things. Obviously you can see on the left there I'm actually tracking what my mineral contents are. And then we jump back and we launch a second vehicle. Now this is, it was stupidly built. I didn't put on enough reactors, so I have to keep a very specific control of the reactor output. The reactor can put out enough to run all the propellers at full and not lose charge, but it'll overheat. So I'm sort of tempering the reactor so that the radiator can keep up. If I put one more radiator on this thing, it would have been perfectly fine, but I forgot to test it and I was, again, lazy and decided to just fly it as is. As it happened, I managed to get over to our other probe. It's not that far away, but it is in a good little spot. So we begin our base setup. Now, if anybody's never used a Pathfinder mod, seriously download it, it's great fun. But you start with your block, and then you have your main, I believe it's a Ponderosa habitat. Chuck this thing down, and then you can configure and attach from there. There's also a couple other ways of starting a base, but this, I prefer building it from the ground up. It is good fun. Sometimes you get funny alignments like there. It didn't seem to align correctly on the block, but it usually fixes itself if you quick save and quick load. So I get setting this up, and at the same time I change the distribution, and because of the remote distribution this has, providing you have a ship close, or plane close in my case, that is a distributor, you can use what's on it, and that's how I get the equipment across to inflate the base and then start adding more things. And as you can see there, we get everything sort of sorted up and get ready to fly our Kerbals back to get more things. I want to recycle everything that's here, and I don't want to recover the plane from here, because if I get it back to the runway there's a higher recovery amount, obviously. And the nuclear reactors are expensive, so I want to recover everything that I send out. But yeah, dead Kerbals. So I now have two less Kerbals. One was an engineer and one was a pilot, so that's a pain. But as you know, Kerbals are callous things, so we bring back the drone just so that we can get the nuclear reactor back for that, because we need the extra money to launch our next ship. And what I've discovered is if you go high enough, you get really good efficiency and you can move quite fast. So I tend to go for a high rate and move at the high altitude and then drop down. And as you can see here, this thing lands like a dream. So from there, we are launching yet more station modules. And to save you the launch and all of the tedium, it was exactly as before, except I didn't re-enter the atmosphere. We get everything up. So a quick tidy up of the docked probes so that I've got more space on hand, and we now have a science lab, a factory for individual items, and a greenhouse. But next is my beautiful mental idea. So how do you launch a rocket that doesn't have enough delta V? You float it up. So I attached a couple of balloons and floated it up to a couple of thousand meters. I think it's 8,000 meters that's there. And then launch it from there. So I get basically through the thickest part of the atmosphere quite quickly. And it saves me a chunk of delta V. It means that I managed to get, I can accelerate at full speed because I'm not worrying about the heat. Now the reason this was necessary because although it looks like an Estonian on the end, this thing is full of cargo. It is full of a base for Minmus, and because it's full of cargo I couldn't put fuel in it. So I've attached a big fuel tank and a nuclear engine, as you can see here. So this thing is what I'm going to send out, but first I'm sending it to the space station because it's got space tourists in it. So I'm going to dock it at the space station and transfer the tourists off and then return them a different way. So I'm going to send up a second craft to return the space tourists, whereas this is going to go on with some engineers because I didn't have the engineers after the last accident. But this is the plan. So we get all docked and the Kraken attacks and we start wobbling while I'm on the menu and there is nothing I can do. So yeah, thanks for watching. Let's see how I manage to fix this. I'll see you again soon. Bye.